The story you are about to hear is true and is intended only for informational purposes. Some of the names, locations, and other details have been changed or omitted in efforts to protect the innocent. Today's story is about Philadelphia convicted criminal Gregory Spector of Feasterville, Pennsylvania. According to court documents on July 21, 2013, 22-year-old Gregory Spector contacted the victim through Craigslist to purchase a Samsung Galaxy S3 cell phone. Mr. Spector and the victim, a 21-year-old Uzbekistani citizen, agreed to meet around 4:00 p.m. on the 10,100 block of Ferndale Street in the Somerton section of Philadelphia to conduct the transaction. Mr. Spector and his wife, who he was purchasing the phone for, arrived together at the location on Ferndale Street. Mr. Spector and the victim agreed upon a price of $290 for the phone and completed the transaction. Later that afternoon, after having the phone service activated, Mr. Spector's wife noticed that the phone began to cut out and indicate that there was no service. Therefore, Mr. Spector called the phone company around 6:30 p.m. that evening to report the issue and was told that the phone's IMEI number was coming back as being stolen. Mr. Spector then contacted the victim to return the phone and get his money back. The victim told Mr. Spector that they could meet at the same location around 9:30 p.m. and that he could only give him back $200 because he already spent $90. Mr. Spector, along with his father, left their residence in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and drove to Philadelphia to meet with the victim. Mr. Spector had in his possession his personal handgun along with an extra magazine. While driving to the meeting location, Mr. Spector called 911 to report the cell phone incident and requested for officers to accompany them to meet the victim. Following the initial call to 911 at 9:45 p.m., Mr. Spector contacted 911 twice more at 10:06 p.m. and 10:23 p.m. to give them their location and to see when officers were coming to meet them. At the same time, the victim was in contact with Mr. Spector asking where he was and threatening to leave. Eventually, around 10:30 p.m., Mr. Spector and his father grew impatient and left their location where they were waiting for police to arrive. When they arrived at the 10,100 block of Ferndale Street, the victim was waiting in his car with his wife at the time. Mr. Spector and the victim exited their vehicles, and the victim gave Mr. Spector the $200. Mr. Spector then told the victim that he was not getting the phone back and aggressively started to yell at the victim. Mr. Spector's father then exited the vehicle and ran over to Mr. Spector and the victim and stated that he was an undercover cop. Mr. Spector's father then grabbed the victim and they began to wrestle, and both eventually fell to the ground. At the same time, Mr. Spector began taking pictures of the victim's license plate. Mr. Spector then tried to grab the victim and was thrown backwards. The victim and Mr. Spector's father got up and continued to push and punch each other. At this point, Mr. Spector's father was against his car with the victim facing him and with the victim's back to Mr. Spector. From about 5 or 6 feet away, Mr. Spector removed his handgun and, without saying anything, fired twice toward the victim's back, causing the victim to fall to the ground immediately. Mr. Spector then walked over to the victim and pointed his gun at him. The victim was not in possession of any weapon at any point on that day. The victim was transported to a local hospital around 11:00 p.m. suffering from a single bullet wound to his back with no exit point, and he was in shock. The bullet shattered the T10 vertebrae and also damaged the T9 vertebrae. The victim was immediately paralyzed from the navel down and will likely be confined to a wheelchair as a paraplegic for the rest of his life. On July 21, 2013, Gregory Spector was arrested and charged with crimes related to the shooting. Both the victim and his wife testified that Mr. Spector and his father were the verbal and physical aggressors of the altercation. Both the victim and his wife stated that when the victim met with Mr. Spector and his father to return their money, it was Mr. Spector and his father who began yelling and cursing at the victim because he did not have the full $290 to return to them. Also, the victim and his wife testified that it was Mr. Spector's father who first shoved and grabbed the victim, which started the physical altercation that eventually led to the shooting. In conclusion, on April 24, 2015, a jury found Mr. Spector guilty of attempted murder, attempted theft, attempted attempted receipt of stolen property, aggravated assault, conspiracy, possessing an instrument of crime, simple assault, robbery, and recklessly endangering another person. On September 9, 2015, following a review of the pre-sentence investigation report, the trial court sentenced 24-year-old Gregory Spector to an aggregate term of 17 to 35 years in a Pennsylvania state correctional institution. The story you just heard was true and is intended only for informational purposes. Some of the names, locations, and other details have been changed or omitted in efforts to protect the innocent.